Look at your hand. The color staring back at you did not arrive by accident, and it did not arrive quickly. It is the surviving record of a 300,000-year negotiation between your ancestors and a star that never once considered their comfort. Every person who has ever lived traces back to a single dark-skinned population in Africa, all of them. There was no pale skin anywhere on Earth when Homo sapiens first appeared. No fair-skinned populations waiting in reserve. No exception hiding somewhere in the fossil record. Then something changed, and the change was not gentle. It involved cancer. It involved a vitamin most people cannot define. It involved a molecule called folate that can end a pregnancy before a woman knows she is carrying one. It involved migration, starvation, and a genetic rewrite forced by farming. The story did not move in a straight line, and it did not move for the reasons most people assume. It moved because survival demanded it, generation after generation, continent after continent. What follows is not a story about beauty. It is a story about a war with ultraviolet light and what your body decided to do to win it. Skin is not packaging. It is the body's largest organ, and it performs dozens of functions most people never think about, including the one that decided the color of every human being who has ever lived. Ultraviolet radiation pours out of the sun constantly, and it is not neutral. It breaks chemical bonds. It damages DNA. It causes mutations, and when those mutations accumulate in the wrong places, they become melanoma, one of the most aggressive cancers known to medicine. The pigment responsible for skin color is melanin, and melanin functions as a built-in filter against that threat. The more melanin a person's skin contains, the more effectively ultraviolet radiation is blocked before it reaches the DNA stored in the deeper layers of tissue. In equatorial Africa, where Homo sapiens first appeared 300,000 years ago, the sun delivered some of the most intense radiation found anywhere on the planet. Under that pressure, natural selection did not deliberate. It did not weigh aesthetics or preference. It ran a single calculation, repeated across millions of individuals over thousands of generations. Did this trait help a person survive long enough to reproduce? Dark skin answered yes, every time. Lighter variants offered no protection and accumulated DNA damage at a higher rate, which meant fewer survivors, fewer offspring, and a trait that could not establish itself. There was no competing outcome. The environment made the decision before any individual had a say in it. What looked like a simple matter of complexion was a defense system, engineered cell by cell against a star that radiated indifferently and offered no second chances. Dark skin was not a feature of early humanity. It was the price of survival under that sun, and for the first 100,000 years of the species, every single person paid it. Ultraviolet radiation did not stop at the skin. It reached deeper into the bloodstream, where it began destroying something most people had never heard of, and almost no one connected to skin color at all. Yet the connection was there, waiting to be noticed. Folate, a form of vitamin B9, circulates constantly through the body, performing maintenance work that has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with survival. Its most critical job happens early in pregnancy, often before a woman knows she is carrying a child. Folate is essential to the formation of the neural tube, the structure that becomes the brain and spinal cord. Without enough of it in those first weeks, the neural tube can fail to close. The result is not a minor complication. It is catastrophic developmental defects, and in many cases, the pregnancy simply ends. Ultraviolet light breaks folate down the same way it damages DNA, and in a sun-drenched environment with no clothing, no shelter, and no sunscreen, that destruction was constant. Women with less melanin allowed more ultraviolet light to penetrate their skin, which meant faster folate depletion, which meant higher rates of neural tube failure, which meant fewer surviving children. This was a separate mechanism from cancer, operating on its own timeline, applying its own pressure, but pointing toward the identical outcome. Two independent biological threats: cancer through DNA damage and reproductive failure through folate destruction, both converging on the same solution: more melanin, darker skin. In equatorial Africa, this was not one advantage among several options. It was two compounding emergencies, both solved by the identical adaptation, reinforcing each other generation after generation, until dark skin was not simply favored, it was close to mandatory, the only configuration that let a population survive intact under that particular sky. Dark skin was not a universal solution. It was a solution to one specific environment, and that environment did not stay fixed forever. Beginning somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began moving out of Africa. No one organized the migration. No single dramatic departure took place. It happened in slow generational drift. A group settling a little farther than their parents had, their children settling farther still, until over thousands of years humans had spread through the Middle East, into Europe, across Asia, and eventually into the Americas. As they moved, the sun itself did not weaken. It remained exactly as indifferent as it had always been. What changed was geometry. At higher latitudes, sunlight strikes the Earth at a lower angle and passes through far more atmosphere before reaching the ground. Ultraviolet radiation is filtered out in the process. Days grow shorter. Winters stretch long and dark. Skies stay overcast for months at a time. In Northern Europe, in Northern Asia, the ultraviolet environment bore almost no resemblance to equatorial Africa, where the ancestral population had needed constant, intense protection from radiation. These new environments offered something closer to scarcity, weak and intermittent light that the body now needed to absorb rather than block. And the very trait that had been engineered for one purpose, blocking ultraviolet light to prevent cancer and folate destruction, suddenly worked against the population carrying it. The danger had not disappeared. It had inverted. Cancer risk at these latitudes was already low, and folate destruction was no longer a meaningful threat, because there was simply not enough ultraviolet radiation left to cause either problem anymore. A different deficiency was forming instead, quietly, in skin that filtered out exactly the light its new environment could no longer afford to spare. Vitamin D is not optional. It regulates how the body absorbs calcium and phosphorus, and without it, calcium intake barely matters, because the body cannot use what it cannot absorb. Skin manufactures vitamin D itself, using ultraviolet B radiation to convert a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol into the form the body needs. In effect, skin functions as a solar panel, and that function depends entirely on radiation reaching it. In children, severe vitamin D deficiency produces rickets, a disease that softens bones until they bow outward, flattens the skull, and stalls growth. In adult women, deficiency can cause osteomalacia, a softening of the pelvic bones that makes childbirth dangerous and, in severe cases, impossible. Mortality data shows women with vitamin D deficiency died in labor at far higher rates than women who were not deficient. The damage does not stop at the skeleton. Vitamin D deficiency weakens immune defenses, reduces muscle strength, and affects cardiovascular health, meaning a single shortage cascades through multiple systems simultaneously. Now, place a population with highly efficient, heavily pigmented skin into Northern Europe long after the migration out of Africa. Their melanin still performs its original function perfectly. It blocks ultraviolet radiation exactly as it was built to. But in a landscape with weak, intermittent sunlight, that same blocking mechanism prevents the synthesis of vitamin D the body now urgently requires. The skin cannot distinguish dangerous radiation from radiation it desperately needs. It simply blocks, regardless. Bones weaken, children develop rickets, mothers die in childbirth at higher rates, and population growth slows. What had been an asset for 100,000 years had become, in this specific environment, a liability with consequences stretching across generations, and evolution, as patient and indifferent as the sun itself, began quietly working against the very trait it had once demanded. Before I show you what happened next, if you've ever looked at your own DNA results and wondered where this exact story fits into your bloodline, I put it all together in a guide called Where Do You Really Come From? Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. For a long time, the standard assumption was that depigmentation happened slowly, a gradual drift stretching across hundreds of thousands of years as populations moved north and adapted bit by bit. Ancient DNA has demolished that assumption completely. Early European hunter-gatherers, people who had lived at northern latitudes for tens of thousands of years, were still significantly dark-skinned. Living under weak northern sun for that long had not produced the pale populations everyone expected to find. The clearest example is a specimen known as Cheddar Man, who lived in what is now Britain roughly 10,000 years ago. When researchers sequenced his ancient DNA in 2018, the results were genuinely strange to modern eyes. He likely carried dark to medium dark skin, dark curly hair, and blue eyes. A combination that looks almost contradictory today, because blue eyes have become so strongly associated with very pale complexions. 10,000 years ago, that association simply did not exist yet. The extremely fair skin now considered typical of northwestern Europe, skin that can burn in a matter of minutes under summer sun, appears to have spread widely only within roughly the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. Set against the full 300,000-year history of Homo sapiens, that is a vanishingly small window, less than 3% of the species' existence. Something accelerated dramatically during that narrow stretch of time, something powerful enough to outpace tens of thousands of years of gradual drift in a fraction of the time. Whatever triggered, it was not a slow continuation of the migration story already in motion. It was a distinct event, with its own cause, arriving late and moving fast, and it is responsible for the specific shade of skin that a huge portion of the modern world now considers simply normal today. The trigger was the Neolithic Revolution, the switch from hunting and gathering to farming, and almost no one talks about what it did to human skin color. Hunter-gatherer diets were varied and naturally rich in vitamin D, built around fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, organ meats such as liver and kidney, and shellfish, some of the most concentrated dietary sources of vitamin D that exist. When populations transitioned to agriculture, that diet collapsed almost overnight in evolutionary terms. Farming communities ate mostly cereals, wheat, barley, oats, and rye, carbohydrates that contributed essentially nothing toward vitamin D intake. Populations that had previously supplemented weak sunlight with a vitamin-rich diet suddenly had nowhere left to turn except their own skin, and if that skin was still dark, the body simply could not produce enough vitamin D to compensate. The selective pressure for lighter skin, which had been building slowly for tens of thousands of years, intensified sharply and almost immediately. Even a small increase in vitamin D synthesis, even a marginal reduction in melanin, suddenly carried enormous survival weight. A second factor accelerated the change further. Farming communities were larger, denser, and more settled than the hunter-gatherer bands that came before them. Population size and density directly affect how fast a beneficial mutation can spread through a gene pool. In a scattered band of 50 people, an advantageous mutation might take an extraordinarily long time to reach neighboring groups. In a farming village of hundreds, Linked to a wider network of other villages, the same mutation could spread through thousands of descendants within only a handful of generations. Diet collapse and population density combined to do something genuinely remarkable. They compressed tens of thousands of years of slow selective pressure into a few thousand years of rapid, visible, archaeologically traceable change. Here is something that surprises most people the first time they hear it. There is no single gene for dark skin and no single gene for light skin, one dominant, one recessive, switching on and off like a light switch. Skin pigmentation is polygenic, controlled by dozens of different genes acting together. Genes that influence how much melanin is produced, what type of melanin is made, how it is distributed inside skin cells, and how skin responds to ultraviolet exposure over a lifetime. What makes this remarkable is what happened when different populations faced the same selective pressure independently. East Asians and Europeans both evolved lighter skin than equatorial Africans, but the genetic variants responsible for that lighter skin in East Asians are largely different from the variants responsible in Europeans. Two separate populations, separated by enormous geographic distance, arrived at a similar outcome through entirely different molecular routes. Biologists call this convergent evolution, the same adaptive solution discovered independently more than once. When natural selection reinvents a trait from scratch in unconnected populations, that is among the strongest signals biology offers that the trait mattered for survival. While on the subject, consider blue eyes, a trait that feels ancient but is not. Every person alive today with blue eyes descends from a single individual who carried one mutation somewhere near the Black Sea, roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Before that person existed, every human eye on Earth was brown. The mutation reduced melanin production in the iris, and it spread because it traveled alongside skin pigmentation variants that were already under selection. Blue eyes are younger than agriculture. They are younger than Stonehenge. Traits we treat as ancient and fixed turned out to be recent edits, still being written into a species that has not finished changing. Look at the whole picture. Skin color, the trait that shaped political systems, justified atrocities, and sorted human beings into hierarchies, is at its biological core nothing more than a calibration dial, an ancestral estimate of how much ultraviolet protection a population needed given where their ancestors lived, ate, and stood under the sun. Light skin is not superior. In equatorial environments, it is a liability, more cancer risk, and fewer surviving children. Dark skin is not primitive. It is the original state, the baseline every other variation modified. If anything, lighter skin is the newer adaptation, not the rule. The same sun that pushed some populations toward more melanin to survive its intensity pushed other populations toward less melanin because they needed more of its limited reach. The star never picked sides. It radiated indifferently and let evolution sort out the consequences across 100,000 generations. Every shade of human skin alive today is the same population, standing once in the African sun, slowly spreading across an unpredictable planet, carrying the record of every environment their descendants passed through. Every skin tone is an answer to a question asked by a star, and every single answer was correct.